The following is intended for informational purposes only. It is intended to supplement classroom training and documentation. It should not be relied on as a replacement or substitute for classroom training with a live expert instructor. Welcome to Lesson 2, Configuring a Form Type. Here we are going to concentrate on the main important parts of creating a form type, which are configuring the form section and lines. And by the end of this lesson we would have completed the personal details section of a simple individual income form that we're going to then use in later lessons. We are going to create a form type. You go to the admin menu, go to form type, and the particular business object that we're going to use is the filing calendar one. Purpose of using the filing calendar business object allows us to actually define the filing period directly on the form type. This is actually going to make our life much more simple when we have to determine the filing period for the obligation. We'll see that later on. So first of all, we have to fill in a form type. This is a unique name, whatever one wants to do. We're going to use individual income. I'm just going to name it anything for 2010. Put my initials maybe, if I can. And I'm going to call this my initials. Let's call it DA, individual income 2010. Detailed description here asks you to fill out an application service. Now you will see that the application service for the related transaction BO, meaning not for the form type but the underlying form that is created, we won't create that. We won't fill in the application service here. It will be generated later on, as you will see. A start date, since it's for 2010, I'm going to just put in the dates for 2010, January 2010. Don't need to use an end date. External form type, if this is in some way linked to a form type which has come in from an external system, one can define the external form type here, and it might be used to associate it in some way. The form category, we have different types of categories, and the obligation period is the one that we will be using as a default. Now we are going to be creating for in this tax form a income tax form, so therefore we're going to use the obligation type in individual income tax. Now whenever there is a change in the form, we can define some parameters here about whether we want to make a form reason, change reason, make it required. In this particular case, overall change reason applicability. Do we make it optional, required, not applicable? We can keep it as optional. And then there's something about called line change reason applicability, which we'll see later on. We're going to make this applicable, and that allows us to actually have a change reason on the line level. Again, we will look at that later on. Form change reasons. Well, since I allow the system to have change reasons, I need to define some here, and I have to create a default as well in cases when the system automatically makes changes. So I'm going to say I'm going to have additional information income acquired. I'm going to also have some general validation error, and the validation error is going to be used as my default when the form is transitioned to an error state. If later on we will see how that works. Again, don't need to go through those details at the moment. Important here is to defining, as I mentioned earlier, the filing period. I'm going to define the filing period directly on the form type, making our life much easier to determine the filing period for the obligation that we need to create. So I'm going to use 2010 annual calendar. I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to make that my default. You can actually have multiple filing periods, but we're going to just have one, and then I'm going to save this form type. Now in this lesson we are going to be looking at adding lines. Adding lines, you will see how this works. Sections and lines. This creates the look and feel for the form, and we will see that the underlining form will be created based upon sections and lines that I now create below here. So I'm going to actually create a very simple form section called personal details. Form section name here is really, again, any unique name. We're going to call it personal details. The description is more important. This is what is usual to see in the user interface, so I'm going to use that description. The form section business name is a very important field. This is going to be used internally for any code, or later on when we look at form rules. This is the name that is going to be used throughout. So therefore I'm going to make sure, and it has to be one word, I call it personal details, and I can decide the sequence of different sections that I want. In this case I'm going to call it the first section, call it 10, and you have an ability to create sections of multiple occurring sections. At the moment we're going to have a non-recurring section. Rule applicability relates to if I want to make this particular section required based upon rules that we will see. I'm going to say no at the moment, and we don't have to deal at the moment with logical deletion. All these settings over here have more explanation when you go to the main and the question, clicking on the question mark over here. So I'm not going through everything, but most of the things which are important I will be dealing with. Now I can define how I need to define what should be my header, my label for this particular section. I can either find an underlying field name in the system, or I can actually create a new one. So I can create a new one if I want, and it will take as a default the description I have over here will be the text for my new label. And over here, when I actually create the field, which we'll call personal details, I can put some help text in, and this will come up to give more information, which you can click on when you look at the form itself. I don't need to use that at the moment, and what at the moment is I'm going to save this, and I'm going to say save and add lines. So I'm going to add some lines into my section. Now there are three different types of lines. A label is simply a label only. There's no actually data related to it. Standard line has a label and information input information if you want, or just read only. And group line we will look at later, which is a specialized type of form line. So we'll start off with the standard line. And we're going to be adding in here a prefix. We're going to use personal details. We're going to put a prefix name, a first name, last name, and an ID type and ID number. So I want to just go through what you need to do in order to create that. First of all, again, any unique name for this particular form, I'm going to call it prefix name. Description, I'm going to be calling it, just for my case, the title, and I'm going to call this title here. Line number is if I want to actually show a line number in the actual form itself, and I don't actually need a line number here. Display sequence is the order of the actual lines within this section. I'm going to call it the first one. BO applicability basically means, is it required on the BO level, this particular field? I leave it as optional. Rule applicability, we will see there's a form rule that takes anything which is defined as a required in this drop down and make sure that they are actually has a value. So you can actually require fields both directly on the business object level or on the form rules level. In this particular case, I leave them optional, which basically means that they are non-required. Visibility, I leave this as being a visible field. I want to be able to see my title, obviously, and this is an input output field. I can define the title, and it's not just for read only. Summary group is going to be useful when we deal with summary lines, which were not group lines, but we're not dealing with that yet. Now, once you've defined that, you also will need to define the actual field under field that we're going to use for the form. Now, we can either use a field which is a real field in the form table, and you see in the drop down all the real fields as opposed to the CLOB fields, in this particular case, exist title is the prefix is not a real field. Data is only held on the CLOB, but I can find, so I'm not going to fill that in. And now I actually come in and I need to now define which particular definition of the field for the title, and I can see, and I'm sure that there is a already existing field that we can use. And if I click here and I look for prefix, I think we will find one. And name prefix flag is good. And you will see this is automatically fills in information as well as the field values. There will be a drop down that will be created. One thing I would like to change though is to change the actual label text. I don't want prefix. I'd rather use the name title in this case. So I can do create new, and I can call that title. So in fact that the label will show title as opposed to prefix. BI mappings related to different product for business intelligence. If we want to output this information to BI, we're not going to deal with that now. The last thing I do want to look at is the line details. Here we can define how many fields we want to actually show related to the title. In fact, not only is the current, which is the existing field, you can also have the initial value, which is the as reported line, and you can also define whether you want to change reason. If you make a change to the particular prefix, do I want to have a change reason? And overridden relates to whether I want form rules basically not to work on this particular field. You can read again more about this clicking on here, and we can also define whether we want the labels current as reported to be shown. I don't want any labels to be shown, and I want to show the current to be visible, so I just leave it like that, and I'm going to save and add another line. So that's the first line that I'm added. And I'm going to add another standard line. Now I'm going to add the first name. Again, I'm going to call this some unique name like first name. Description is going to be first name. Don't need a detailed description if I don't want one. Form line business name, I'm going to call it first name. Line number, we don't need this. Now it's the second of the sequence. Do I want the particular field to be required? No, I don't need the first name to be required. Do I want to be visible? Yes. Input? Yes. Summary group not part of, so that's fine. I move on to the field definitions, and here you will see that there is a first name in the related form, and then I can use that, and I want to use that, and it will automatically update the data which is put on the form on the CLOB directly into the actual real field called first name, and the actual data definition is already copied from that field, so I don't have to do anything here. Down at the line details, I'm going to also remove the display label and leave that as visible, and then I save and add another line. I'm going to add in my last name now. Call it last name. It's the third one. Let me say here that I want the rule, form rule, to make this a required field, so you have to have at least the last name. Last name is also found in the base fields. And again here I don't want to show the labels, and now I'm going to save and add another line and move on to the ID type and value. I'm going to also make this required by the rule. I'm going to find that we have a related form field here called ID type. Automatically fills in the information as a drop down. We'll see that the ID type will come in as a drop down, and I'm going to again get rid of the labels. And finally I'm going to add in an ID number. Also making this required. ID number is the name, the text, which is fine. Making this, and I'm going to save that. So, as you see over here on the right hand side, we have now 5 different fields. If I go back to my form type, you will be able to see now the section and lines. If I go down, you'll see the section there. I click on, you'll see the 5 fields. So what have we learned in this lesson? We've shown that the most important thing when you define a form type is to choose the correct underlying business object. For this individual income example, we're using the filing form type and filing calendar form type, and the one that actually requires you to have a filing period. Besides that, we will need to define always an obligation type for a form type, so that a form type is used for a specific type of obligation, whether it's individual income, sales and use. After defining those things, there are things which you need to define, like sections and lines and form rules, and we spent most of our time discussing how you configure a section and a line, and we've seen that there's quite a lot of configuration needed to do so. And we will continue on later lessons looking at how we actually configure form rules.